constitutional procedure. But, and as part of, as the minority leader said, digesting what has been brought up so far, also through reviewing the records of the deliberations of the Constitutional Commission. But in the meantime, in response to the first objection of the Senate President and the request of Senator Cheese, and having clarified the intent of my point of order, because I feel, most of all, Mr. Chair, I feel what Justice Mendoza has raised is a prejudicial question. But for now, I submit to the objection and the ruling of the chair.
So I
for
take
today,
it you're not
Chair.
insisting
you,
on the
Mr.
motion
Chair.
for today. Yeah.
I am submitting to the objection, Mr.
Okay.
Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for graciously doing so. That allows us to proceed. And of course, we want to place it on record. Justice Mendoza's opinion is one of many. And earlier we heard a contrary opinion from Justice Ascuna, who was a member of the 1987 Constitutional Commission. So even the best lawyers, this shows the public that even the best lawyers can disagree sometimes.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Yes, Chief Justice David.
Just to add a little on the controversy. It is just to correct the part of the statement of Justice Mendoza on what happened in the Constitutional Commission. The fact of the matter is I happen to be the chair of the Legislative Committee, and my good friend Adolf here was the vice chairman of that committee. The committee recommended a unicameral body. And at the time that the transitory provision, rather the article on amendments and revision to the Constitution and transitory provisions were taken up, it was based precisely on the assumption that what would be adopted eventually would be as recommended by our committee, which was unicameral. Unfortunately, during the plenary session on a voting as to the form of government, whether bicameral or the form of the legislature, whether bica or uni, by one single vote, the committee lost. And it was the motion of Delegate Villegas who voted that we adopt the bicameral assembly. Same thing happened in the committee, as a matter of fact. The committee actually voted for a bicameral body, originally. As chair, I voted to break the tie in favor of uni. So that is exactly what happened. But you don't have to worry about it, because if you read the commentary of Justice Father Barnas, one of the members of the Constitutional Commission, in his book, The 1987 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines, a commentary, 2003 edition, page 1297, it is very clear that Congress may do so, propose amendments either a single body or in a joint session. If it were in a single body, each one can propose. And that was what I answered before to the question of Senator Legarda. What Congress can do in the first instance would be a simple legislation, proposing an amendment. So the Senate can do that, propose an amendment. Or, once it is approved, the proposal will go to the lower house. The lower house, in the regular process of legislation, will act on it. There may be debates, as earlier, there may be amendments, and several amendments may be proposed. On track, for instance, is the resolution of both houses number 6 now in the lower house, authored by Congressman Salceda. It will open up the entire provisions on the national patrimony and economy. Not only 3, not only 4 in the resolution of Senator Gatchalian, which is your joint, which is actually your resolution about houses number 1. That was the first. That was filed in July of 2022, and it was submitted to the Mother Committee on Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes. And public hearings were held on, as earlier announced, all over the country. But we do not know yet what had been the proposal of the Mother Committee. That is exactly the reason why I also raised in my preliminary statement whether after this subcommittee shall have acted on this resolution number 6, the subcommittee's report will go back to the Mother Committee, and the Mother Committee to treat it simultaneously with the resolution of Senator Gatchalian. If it had not been acted upon, there are no reports. If there had been a report, we should like to find out. Now, again, if there had been no report, does it mean that by treating this particular resolution, we will be abandoning resolution number 1? So that is the issue that I raised. So now, since it was, go back to the issue of PICA and UNI, I would request you to, is embodied in my position paper, and it is also in my position paper submitted to the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation of the Honorable Noy Morcoso. So these are the clarification I would like to put.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice Davide. That was very clear. Anybody else want to weigh in? We'll go back to Senate President Pro Temp Legarda. She still has 6 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Justice Mendoza, for making that very important and relevant clarification on the goings-on, which you said are on record in the 1987 Constitution, because in no uncertain words you had clarified that both houses of Congress, even if it was unicameral at the time, had envisioned that the votes will be counted separately, and therefore any joint voting must be deemed separate. I think that's very clear, Justice Mendoza. We are grateful for that clarification once again, and it is evident that the People's Initiative, as worded, that has been going around in different districts in the country, it renders it illogical or an aberration based on the statement you made on the intent of the framers of the 1987 Constitution. Thank you, sir. It's very clear. Now I go back to my questions on the inclusion of the clause unless otherwise provided by law. The addition of the clause unless otherwise provided by law, while giving us, the legislature, both houses in this case, the power to modify the nationality requirements in the future by legislation, should be read together, obviously, with other provisions of the Constitution, including Section 10, which you mentioned, Article 12, on the national economy and patrimony, which has been discussed in the past several weeks, because we know that we're only amending Articles 12, 14, and 16. I will not read the whole section into the record, but perhaps Section 10, when it says, Congress shall, upon recommendation of the Economic and Planning Agency, when the national interest dictates, reserve the citizens of the Philippines or to corporations at least 60%, and we know that. And at the end, it says, the state shall regulate and exercise authority over foreign investments with its national jurisdiction and in accordance with its national goals and priorities. So my question is, because we are amending to our RBH number 6, only Articles 12, 14, and 16, how, and we are not amending the national economy and patrimony provision, how can we be aligned without touching this provision? Will we be consistent with other articles of the Constitution if, unless otherwise provided by law, is only instituted in Articles 12, 14, and 16? Will it be, in short, will it be consistent with the national economy and patrimony provision of the Constitution, several lines of which I read into the record? Thank you. I address this to Justice Ascuna, Chief Justice Davide, and Justice Mendoza. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, may I answer that question?
Go ahead, Justice.
It's true that under Article 2, Section 19, it provides that the state shall establish a national economy that is independent, resilient, independent, and effectively controlled by Filipinos. Effectively controlled. Now, if we amend sections, Articles 12, 14, and 16 to make the economic restrictions on the percentages changeable by legislation, it does not mean that it will result in an economy no longer effectively controlled by Filipinos, because you can still provide, for instance, a 51-49, 51 Filipino, 49 foreigner, is still effectively controlled by Filipinos. It doesn't have to be 60-40. In Spain, it's 51-49, and the foreign investors are happy with that. They don't like 60-40, but they're acceptable to 51-41, so 51-49. So it's still effectively controlled by Filipinos. So it's not inconsistent, Mr. Chair. You can also put safeguards such as reciprocity, safeguards such as what is provided for in the International Covenant on economic, social, and cultural rights, that a nation may, a people may allow the foreigners to enjoy their resources in accordance with the principles of mutual benefit and international law. So you can introduce that. So when you say it's subject to legislation, number one, the restriction continues until legislation provides otherwise. Number two, the legislation should take into consideration the framework of investments under the rest of the Constitution, which is that it is supposed to be an economy effectively controlled by Filipinos. So it has to be consistent with that framework, and the entry of foreign investment must be for our mutual benefit. That's why I believe, Mr. Chair, that we should not remove the restriction with respect to non-renewable resources, because that would imperil the effective control of Filipinos over the entire economy. So advertising, even education, and public utilities will not necessarily remove the effective control of Filipinos from the entire economy. Thank you.
The views of both Justices Mendoza and Davide, please. Thank you. Perhaps?
Justice Mendoza.
These many provisions, Article 12, Article 14, and Article 16, simply carry out a general statement found in Article 2, Section 19, which says that the state shall develop a national economy that is independent and controlled by Filipinos. So, if you do not want these provisions in 12, 14, and 16, which are exclusively Filipinos, you want to open these activities to foreigners. Just remove that provision of Article 12, Section 19, because that is a basic principle, and they simply carry out that provision. In that way, you leave it to Congress to decide what the policy on economic activities and the patrimony of the nation should be. It has been said here that in other countries, that's simply left to legislation, ordinary law. But that's probably they don't have the same constitutional provision that we have. But as long as Article 2, Section 19 on national economy is there, you will have a contradiction, Senator. What you declare in Article 12, Section 19, you contradict because you leave it to Congress by ordinary law to change what the policy or principle should be. As it stands now, and I'm trying to help the committee with its resolution number 6. Resolution number 6 sounds more like an amendment to give Congress the power to amend the Constitution rather than an amendment of economic provisions. The emphasis, as I see it, is more on the power of Congress to change what has been declared as fundamental principles in the Constitution. Now, we cannot have a Constitution that is self-contradictory, that carries with it the seeds of contradiction. You declare solemnly in Article 12, Section 19, that we have to have a national economy controlled by Filipinos. And yet, you want to amend the provisions of 12, 14, and 16 and open this to foreigners and remove control in the hands of Filipinos. We will have a very contradictory position. That's just like saying, amend the Constitution in this manner, and then you have a provision there that the people have a right of revolution.
Thank you for that, Justice Mendoza. That was actually the crux of the matter, my question, because we're amending 12, 14, 16, but focusing on the article or the section on national patrimony and economy, where it says that the economy will be run by Filipinos. My question answered it very distinctly. Is there an alignment or is there a need to look at a broader view? Because we may amend certain articles, but it may be inconsistent, which you said it could possibly be. So thank you for giving me clarity, but it also brings me more questions, but I may not have the time now. I would like to have a session with the three of you, and perhaps at another time on the second round, ask and persist on that question. But you have validated my thoughts that there could be some non-alignment or inconsistency, but that's something to be studied about. Thank you so much, Justice. Chief Justice, please.
Yes, I am glad that this matter was taken up because at the end of the day, what would be actually amended would be two sections of Article 2 of the Constitution on state principles and policies. The first would actually refer to education. The state, that's Section 17 of Article 2, the state shall give priority to education, science and technology, arts, culture, sports to foster patriotism and nationalism. I read that earlier. Accelerate social progress and promote total human liberation and development. The second is what Justice Mendoza had said, but it is actually Section 19. The state shall develop a self-reliant and independent national economy effectively controlled by Filipinos. Now, these are the fundamental state policies which are actually supposed to be implemented by way of specific provisions in the succeeding articles. Consequently, the succeeding articles cannot be amended by any guise whatsoever if it would affect the fundamental state policy. Now, if you are going to amend education, public utilities, or advertising, or media, on the other parts of the economic provisions, you will in fact be amending Section 2 of the Constitution. When you amend Section 2 in the Constitution, which relates to state policies and fundamental policies. It would mean, therefore, not just an amendment. It is a revision of the Constitution. Now, a revision cannot be done by this time. You have to open the entire Constitution. And now, this is what I would say. Any proposal to adopt the parliamentary form, the federal system mentioned by Resource Speaker Mr. Nungdom, even in the matter of the economic emancipation proposed by our former Secretary Gary Teves, will open actually the Constitution to revisions, not merely amendments. Are we prepared for a revision? There are again two ways, according to Section 1 of Article 17. What shall we do right now? Shall we call for a constitutional convention? We should open the entire Constitution, not only what is being desired today, probably adopting a parliamentary form or a federal system. You can do that, but it should be by revision. I am not prepared for a revision. As I mentioned earlier, I am against any kind of amendment to the Constitution. When I voted for the draft of the Constitutional Commission of 1986, on the final draft, I said that this is the Constitution I am willing to die for. Why? Because actually, this is now the time that I could say it. Why did I say it? It is the only constitution in our country, and even in the whole world, that is pro-God, pro-life, pro-Filipino, pro-people, pro-poor, pro-social justice, pro-human rights, pro-family, pro-marriage, pro-environment, and I will add now, pro-youth, pro-women. Shall we amend? Shall we revise? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justice.
You have 2 minutes left, Madam Pro Tem.
I have longer questions, but I will yield my 2 minutes, Mr. Chair, to the others who may ask on the second round or the second hearing. Thank you, esteemed justices. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senate President Pro Tem Legarda. Next is Majority Leader Villanueva, and after that, Minority Leader Pimentel, then Senator Chairperson Robin Padilla, then Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me put on the records how grateful and blessed I am as a member of this august chamber to be here this morning, this afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and listen to the great minds of our justices, economists present here today. I cannot overemphasize, Mr. Chairman, the overwhelming joy and gladness that I am feeling, that I am here with you sitting in special ringside tickets, Mr. Chairman, listening to our idols, our legal luminaries. I just have some few points, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to raise, considering that this representation is the chairperson of the Senate Committee on Rules, and the Senate President made mention about the direction that we are about to tread after a series of hearings, probably, and when we come up with a committee report. Just to put on record, Mr. Chairman, I'm here to listen, and I have yet to make that decision on whether or not I am for or against charter change. And it's such a great privilege to be in that position, to have this opportunity to listen to experts. May I just ask our legal luminaries, Justice Ascuna, Justice Davide, Justice Mendoza. The Senate President made a statement a while ago that after these hearings, series of hearings, the subcommittee, this mother committee, would come up with a committee report. And once we have the committee report, can the Senate actually enter its function as a constituent assembly? And with that, we will be, as Senator Bato mentioned, we will be by then wearing our second hat. And as the Senate President made mention a while ago, we can do that in the morning so that it will not interfere with our legislative function as a Senate in afternoon session. I also wanted to know if, based on the records of the Constitutional Commission, what should be the next steps for the Senate to formally assume the function as a member of a constituent assembly and not merely as legislators? I mean, do we need to have another joint resolution, or will an ordinary resolution suffice, Mr. Chairman, or this RBH number 6 be sufficient for this purpose? These are questions that I would like to seek clarification, humbly submitting to this body and awaiting for the answers by our resource persons, Mr. Chair.
Yes, anybody can weigh in from our legal experts, since it's a procedural question. Anyone care to answer from our three justices? Justice Escuna? Yes, I see you reaching for your mic, sir.
Permission of the chair, I respectfully submit that the Senate can act first or independently of the House in proposing amendments, as long as it's very clear that they are acting under Article 14 and not under Article 6. There's the ideal way is to have resolution of both houses worded the same way. That's why it's called resolution of both houses. It should not differ. And it should be approved in the same way, with same wording. That's why a joint hearing is not necessary, but you should caucus together. Perhaps it was better before when there was only one legislative building, when the Senate was upstairs and the House was downstairs, and it was very easy for you to get together. So now, but with communications like that, you can also get together and informally agree on the joint resolution, so that your joint resolution will really be joint. No need for joint hearing, but the joint resolution should be identical, so that there's no conflict. If it's approved by 3/4 of the Senate and approved by 3/4 of the House, then you submit it for a plebiscite already. Yan po ang solution. And not necessarily, of course, a joint hearing is ideal, where you meet as one body, but vote separately. That is not prohibited, but to me, it's not required. The advantage of that is you can hear each other. The congressmen, the representatives can hear the senators, senators can hear the representatives. But as I said, with modern media, you can hear each other also without having to jointly meet. So ganun po, maybe your rules can clarify that. You don't have rules on how to conduct proceedings to amend or propose the Constitution. As I had recommended earlier, you should amend your quorum. Right now, your rule on quorum is only majority, 12 plus 1. You should amend it so that if you are considering proposals to change the Constitution, your quorum should be 18, because that's 3/4. That way, even if joint voting is required, you have to require 18 senators to be present in the joint voting. So the Constitution says each house can adopt its own rules. So you're free to adopt your own rules pursuant to the Constitution itself. So you can adopt rules on how to amend the Constitution. I respectfully submit there's no need for a joint hearing as long as you signal that your activity is now under Article 14 rather than Article 6. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Justice Asguna. Did I get it right? You were saying we don't need another resolution other than RBH 6 if we conduct ourselves or constitute ourselves as a constituent assembly when we finally deliberate on the committee report. As you made mention a while ago, the word "be it enacted" can also be replaced by the word "be it resolved." So that is already a signal to the other house that we have indeed constituted ourselves into a constituent assembly. Is that a correct?
My own view right now.
Please, Justice.
I do not know if the Senate rules provide for the calling of a joint session. I do not know if the Senate rules also provide for the calling of a joint session. Now, if there are none in both, probably the Speaker and the Senate President may agree to call for a joint session, precisely to consider this. Otherwise, we have to go to the other way around, meaning to say you submit it as a single proposal as if in ordinary legislation, with in mind, however, according to the suggestion of Justice Adolph, that it is really intended for amendment to the Constitution. I hope, however, that the Senate and the lower house can agree on some amendments to the respective rules, precisely on the matter of calling for a joint session. The Constitution is very clear that you have a joint session for the SONA, for instance, that is a joint session. And in the provision on martial law, the lifting of martial law, you have a provision regarding a joint session. So probably that could be settled.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chief Justice Davide. In fact, we just exercised this particular rule that we were talking about when we called for a joint session to listen to the keynote speech of the Prime Minister of Japan, Prime Minister Kishida.
But not to vote jointly?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Not to vote. Thank you. I just wanted to...
Mr. Chairman, if I may just say a few words.
Please, please.
Justice is finished? Tapos na mo?
If Justice
Go ahead.
David is finished.
Go ahead, Justice Mendoza.
Yes, yes. I think what should be done here, and this is a precedent, you see right after the war, the Congress that we had was the Congress of the Commonwealth government, which was a bicameral Congress. If you want a clear example of what they did when they amended the Constitution to grant parity rights to Americans and to corporations owned by Americans, just turn to the pages of Mabanag versus Lopez Bito, because the war destroyed the records. It's there in the concurring opinion of Justice Briones. What did they do? They invited each other to come together. And what did they do? After the invitation of one house was accepted, the two houses met together according to the certification of the secretaries of both houses. They met together in the session hall of the House of Representatives. Where? In Lepanto. You want to see the clear example of a resolution? It's there. Mabanag versus Lopez Bito, the concurring opinion of Justice Briones.
It's not in Spanish, Justice. Because some of his opinions were in Spanish, if I'm not mistaken.
No, it's not Spanish. Yeah, it's Spanish, but the resolution is quoted. The resolution is quoted.
Kaya ni Majority Leader ho yan. We'd like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Pia Cayetano, our chairperson of the Blue Ribbon Committee. Good afternoon, ma'am. Go ahead, Majority Leader.
Gracias, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, another thing that I'd like to and this is my last, Mr. Chairman, to ask Dr. Sikat, Secretary Teves, and even the executive director of Ibon Foundation. I was looking at the factors deterring foreign investments, no? And Secretary Balisacan noted, the secretary, that said that aside from removing certain restrictions in the Constitution, there's also a need to address issues relating to ease of doing business, high cost of inputs like energy, and the predictability of our policies. In terms of prioritization, perhaps we can also look into this. Ano ba yung what should come first, no? Removing the restrictions in the Constitution or addressing these other issues? Si Senator Amy made mention a while ago, and she's been very vocal about it with her dealings with investors, foreign investors, for quite some time, as she has been the chairperson of the Senate Committee on Economic Affairs. Parang hindi ho nabanggit itong pagpapalit o pag-aamyenda ng ating konstitusyon. Ano ba talaga yung factors that prevent foreign investors from investing more in the Philippines? You look at BSP, for instance, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, the top 3 main drivers of foreign direct investment are market size and potential, institutional and regulatory quality, and trade openness. So, gusto lang natin maintindihan gusto, no? When it comes to sinasabi ng matatanda sa amin sa Bulacan, importante na itatanong yung mga tamang tanong at masiguro na yung mga information.
There is an interdependence between the restrictions that we have with the ease of doing business. If you notice, for instance, all the restrictions that are listed oftentimes are already indicators of what are not to be undertaken by foreigners. So to some extent, you already get those embedded in the ease of doing business, because no one in the government would really proceed with undertaking clearances unless they have cross-checked many of these items. So one of the implications of this statement is that for years and years, the fact that we got to have very complicated rules of approvals in government had gotten this from all the regulations we had, which can be traced back to the restrictions in the Constitution. Now, of course, some of these developments in bureaucracy oftentimes get infected further by the rules and the activities undertaken by management and bureaucracy to see to it that their mandates are also protected. And some mandates of institutions are not necessarily connected with all these other provisions. So really, to some extent, we will achieve a lot of easing of the business rules if we had really very simple rules at the top. Now, as I said, a great difficulty is that at the top you have unshakable rules written in stone that cannot be easily changed. Of course, foreign investments, depending on what they do, they have different kinds of responses to certain incentives provided by the government or by institutions. The main point, of course, is that their main concern, I think, is essentially living with the hosts when they are inside, but seeing to it that their borderline, the rules about what they do on rates of return and so on should be also respected. When those things get violated, they move out of the system.
Thank you, Director Sigat. Siguro I pose this question as well to Secretary Teves, who made mention a while ago that with this, and can we just focus on the amendments based on RB H6? You made mention, sir, a while ago that after this, if it materializes, there is a clear, compelling message to investors that we're open for business.
Majority Leader Villanueva, I hope I can explain it in this manner, Senator. Generally, there are two types of investors now. One would be the group who would know us already. They're dealing with us despite all the limitations imposed in our Constitution. The other would be a group of investors that are not yet familiar, they don't know much about the Philippines, but they have excess funds and they'd like to put it somewhere. So normally, when it comes to, let's say on my left, let's say these are the potential investors who are not familiar with the Philippines, they would start with conducting what we call a table survey, Mr. Senator. It's putting, for example, what's the legal framework in the Philippines compared to Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, etc. As pointed out earlier by my colleague, if right off the bat they say the legal framework, prohibition against the following activities embodied in the Constitution, and then they see that in other countries these are not there. So the instinct of the potential foreign investors who are not yet familiar with the Philippines is to say, I'd rather than look at more seriously the other countries. So we're losing potentially that group of investors if they realize that up to now we're still putting those restrictions in the Constitution. No? So that's the reason why in our statement, Mr. Senator, we're saying that the removal of this economic restriction, it would be necessary, but not a sufficient condition. We still have to work on those areas that you properly mentioned. No? So I thought that maybe that would be really a good starting point, but we have to continuously work on those other things that you mentioned, improving our infrastructure, improving further our public utilities availability, power, etc. So we would like to be in a similar starting position with the others. We are now at a clear disadvantage in terms of at least the legal framework. So that's the reason why we have been advocating for this constitutional change. May I add something which as a layman, and maybe I will hear my colleagues, but maybe, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Senator, it might be a product of my subconscious, no? We are interested in ensuring that there's consistency among these provisions. We talk about it. As a layman, maybe we can ask, what is, I could not remember, Chief Justice Davide, what is the fine legal distinction between an amendment and a revision? No? For instance, in our statement, Mr. Senator, we did say that we're proposing also amendments in the Declaration of Principles. For example, we said that instead of the state shall develop a self-reliant and independent national economy effectively controlled by Filipinos, and restate this. In my mind, as a layman, is an amendment. Restate it and quote, the state shall develop a self-reliant and independent economy, national economy, removing the words effectively controlled by Filipinos. Would that be an amendment or is that a revision to ensure that there's consistency with our position that we would like the economy to be fully open, liberalized. So that is something that I'm not too sure how to handle it because I'm not a lawyer, but I said my subconscious is working on me as far as that particular position is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Teves, and I'm sure it will be tackled here in this committee hearing, but I don't want to spend more time on just this particular issue. And before I hear the answer of Executive Director Africa, let me just show you something, Your Honors. No? When you talk about liberal ownership rules, sinasabi ho nila yung foreign direct investments entry is influenced by political stability, market size, trade openness, exchange rate rules, skill levels, labor market conditions, and infrastructure. Now, examples by analogy, Director Africa, no? Yung Singapore and Vietnam. These countries do not allow foreign ownership by land, yet FDIs, if you look at the slide that I am showing right now, yet FDIs are continuously increasing. This shows that restrictive foreign ownership will have somehow, if you look at this slide, very little effect in terms of FDI if there are other incentives to invest in the country. Now, another example is Cambodia. Cambodia, which permits 100% ownership, foreign ownership of companies in most sectors, yet it has lower FDIs compared to other ASEAN countries, imposing caps on some industries, Your Honor. Foreign businesses report disadvantages vis-a-vis Cambodian or other foreign rivals that engage in acts of corruption or tax evasion or take advantage of Cambodia's poor regulatory enforcement. Last but not the least, Your Honor, no, yung U.S. Department of State also made mention about inputs. Ito very important, and I appreciate what Secretary Teves made mention a while ago, and our chairman made mention that this is not a miracle pill. Now, once we go for it, everything changes, no? Kasi itong U.S. Department of State made mention about poor infrastructure, high power costs, slow broadband connections, regulatory inconsistencies, a cumbersome bureaucracy, and corruption remains disincentives to investment in the Philippines, as well as inefficiency and uncertainty of the Philippine judicial system. And I just want to strike a balance here, sir, Your Honor, if you can also give us your views on this particular topic, Director Africa.
Thank you po. I'll speak slower kasi wala ng time limit eh. Sige. I think po...
Na-realize mo na nagmamadali ako dahil inoorasan ako ng chairman namin.
I think po the numbers you showed show how simplistic, simple-minded it is to talk about restrictions and then make 10 million leaps towards development. I think precisely those are good examples you raised because, for instance, there's this whining about the inflexibility of the Constitution, things like that. Pero, for example, telecommunications in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Indonesia, it's about, I think it's capped at 49%. Some of them, their own transport, their power, they also have similar caps. I mean, it's in the slide we showed. Pero anong point po doon? The point is, again, with all due respect, I'm sure investors do that table thing. Pero hindi naman bobo investors eh. They do have familiarity with the Philippine context. They know how expensive power is. They know how expensive, how bad traffic is. They know how bad corruption is. So parang kung ihani lahat ng mga yon, it's too simple-minded to fixate on the foreign equity restrictions. Lalo't-lalo na, and I do have to stress, whether it's by law or in the Consti, secondary na, it's there eh. Kumbaga, may pagka-path dependence tayo. The question isn't no longer we want the flexibility in the abstract, but if that restriction is there, whether it's in law or in the Constitution, if it's useful, let's keep it there. And I think a lot of the problems with discussion about yung cha-cha, again, with due respect, parang you want a message you're open for business, kailangan ba baguhin ang saligang batas for that? Medyo, it's just like, it's so absurd eh. And I think if the whole point is to develop the country, these restrictions were not problematic for the last great industrializers, South Korea and Taiwan, noong 70s and 80s. They're not problematic for, okay, walang restrictions in a lot of sectors in China, but they have such huge regulatory administrative in licensing interventions. So parang, to reduce everything to the equity restrictions, it's a bit too much. Eh. So the bigger question is, sabi nyo nga, why would the foreign investor come here? Kasi kikita sila because malaki yung domestic market. Because they can sell to the Singaporean market, they can sell to the Malaysian market, the Thai market. Paano benta na sa Pilipinas if, because of the inequities sa distribution ng wealth, you have 70%, according to the Bangko Sentral, over 7 out of 10 families walang ipon. Diba? According to SWS, over 8 out of 10 families either poor or nasa borderline sila. So parang, anong pagkakitaan ng negosyante selling to the Philippines? In the same way, productivity. How can you be productive kung ang baba ng educational system mo, ang baba ng standards ng quote-unquote human capital, ang baba ng productivity nila, ang mahal ng kuryente, grabe yung corruption. May nakusap ako quite recently, natawa nga ako eh. It was a Korean lamenting about yung problem ng corruption in Korea. At he picked this up from, I forgot what some textbook he read before. Sabi, it holds today. The problem with Korean corruption, with Philippine corruption compared to Korean corruption, sa Philippine corruption, yung mga corrupt na officials, pataasan ng bayad. So yung investor, hahanapin yung pinakasigurado na makuha nila. Sa Korea daw, standardized yung bayad. So kumbaga for them, yung predictability ng corruption, that's actually what they needed. Ayaw nila yung papasok sila, magbabayad, tapos 6 months later, oh my God, ang daming sisingilin. So again, so ang daming permutation.
You know, Director Africa, can I just stop you there, no? And I get what you're pointing out, what you're emphasizing, and it is good that we can listen to all parties involved and stakeholders, most especially the rationale of what we wanted to look into right now is also what we're getting from Director Sikat a while ago, that if there's something wrong, and I think wala naman hong perpekto na konstitusyon, wala ring perpektong batas, at kung merong kailangang baguhin, ano ba talaga yung paraan, at meron ba talagang kapangyarihan ang Kongreso na baguhin ito, no? And another thing that crosses my mind while you were talking, Director Africa, is the idea na binuksan natin pero hindi natin mapalipad ng husto yung ibon. Parang nilagay natin sa hawla at hindi makalipad ng mas mataas kung kaya niyang lumipad ng mas mataas. But let me give you another example. No? When we passed the Public Services Act in 2022, we also passed Foreign Investments Act at saka yung Retail Trade Liberalization Act. No? And by joining RCEP in 2023, kayo kanina, ang dami kong nakikitang mga numbers, figures, and graphs. Mahilig tayo sa ganyan, you know. And I just wanted to find out, based on your monitoring and assessment, since their enforcement, no, ano ba yung respective impacts nitong mga foreign direct investments? Because if you look at the foreign investments approved on second quarter of 2022, if we can show the slide, it was recorded at 59.09 billion pesos, Your Honor. 59.09 billion pesos, an increase of 27.8% from 46.26 billion pesos total foreign investments in the same quarter of 2022. So again, the question is, looks like it's working, the laws that we passed, but will it go higher? Will it increase further if we liberalize it all the more and open up more investments, Your Honor?
Sir, I do want to stress, may yung tinatawag na fallacy of composition, very appealing kasi na, of course, when an investor comes to the Philippines, of course they're going to hire workers. Of course, there's going to be economic activity. Of course, there's going to be that marginal contribution to growth and everything. Pero para sa amin, fallacious to think na yung pakinabang in a firm is yung pakinabang ng ekonomiya. At bakit ganon po? Kasi yung problema dun sa ganong klaseng pag-iisip na yung pagpasok ay automatically, pag-unlad na natin yon, nakakalimutan, kung pumasok sila, pero walang long-term contribution na pag-unlad natin, pag alis nila, walang may iwan sa atin. So sa amin, isang magandang example talaga yung Intel. Yung Intel came here, their second overseas plant was in I think not Cavite, Makati, bago ilipat sa Cavite in 1973. Over 35 years, nandito sila until 2009. They invested over $1.5 billion. They hired about 2,000 workers. They were exporting at some point, I think, $400, $500 million a year. Magandang headlines. Tuwan-tuwa yung mga tao every time they report yung expansion trabaho. Pero in 2009, I don't know why, they left. Part of the plant went to Vietnam, part went to Malaysia. They shut down dito. Ano niiwan sa Pilipinas? I think yun ang time din 2009, bumili yung CDR King sa atin eh. And I'm not being facetious. Yun ang problema. They were here for so long, yung metrics natin for the success was yung investment, yung jobs, may technology transfer, wala eh. Kasi peking technology transfer nangyari. Because they were here, we were coming out with press releases, Philippines, one of the biggest exporters ng semiconductors sa world. Hindi naman tayo yun eh. It's an American firm based here. And when they left, walang iniwan sa atin. And there's a logic. Walang iiwan sa atin kasi, if you're Intel, tutulungan ba yung Pilipino to produce another semiconductor? Kakompetensya mo yun. Kakompetensya mo for the productive labor force, kakompetensya for the raw materials, eventually kakompetensya for markets. So sa amin, ang point lang doon, huwag natin ipagpalagay na just because it's foreign investment here, making its money, and in the short term, hiring jobs, contributing to GDP, hindi yun yung long-term develop na kinakailangan natin. If you talk about where this Intel or Hanjin, yung nga even naman lang pa right now, yun yung nawawala sa atin eh. Kaya nabanggit kayo about yung controlled by Filipinos. We have to learn. We have to learn to produce. We have to have the technology. And that technology transfer, pinagkakait sa atin yan ng mga foreign investors. I've talked to so many workers, may mga ano sila, may mga waivers dyan na once they leave an electronics firm sa Laguna halimbawa, for 25 years, yung tutulong nila hindi na pwede gamitin. So ang point lang doon, we have nothing in principle against foreign investment. May pakinabang dyan. The technology is there, the capital is there, the markets, the connections. Pero kung di gagawin yung gobyerno to make sure may mapiga tayo, rational ang foreign investor eh. They'll want to make their profits while they're here. They want to leave as little as possible para walang kompetensya. And then when it's convenient for them, aalis sila. So sa amin, we're not advocating in any way na magsara. Ang point lang namin, matuto tayo sa leksyon ng the last great industrializers, South Korea and Taiwan. Mula mag-globalization at everyone's in a race to the bottom of the track for investment. Wala na nag-industrialize since then. Ikalawa, matuto rin tayo from what industrial powers right now are doing. The reason the US is spending, I think, $500 million on its semiconductor renewable industry. The reason may trade wars sa China, ito nga industrial power na siya, feeling niya kailangan niya makailang para protekta ng Amerikanong industriya. Paano ba kaya tayo na walang Pilipino industriya or napakaliit? So again, quick example lang, even sa jeepney modernization, oo nga, hindi manufacturers yung mga local firms, they're assemblers. Pero ano mas okay? May assembly na may dagdagang trabaho dito, or we import ng buong buo, most of the trabaho is dun sa Chinese firm, Japanese firm, Korean firm, American firm. So sa amin, hakbang-hakbang talaga yan, pero kung wala yung orientation, kung wala yung vision na pagpalakas ng lokal na industriya, binibigyan natin lahat sa dayuhan. At yun nga, doon nawawala yung control natin sa ating ekonomiya, sa ating rekurso, sa ating lakas paggawa.
Thank you, Director Africa. I know I have no more time, Your Honor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to ask questions. Let me just end by saying I thank God that we are all here today. I can see the chairperson of the EDCOM 2 Commission. The commissioners are here, Commissioner Pia Cayetano, Commissioner Sani Angara. And it is really important that whatever, I already mentioned the chair, no? And whatever we do, and let me stress that in the passage of Public Services Act, Foreign Investments Act, Retail Trade Liberalization Act, this representation would keep on emphasize and pound on the idea of a working technology transfer. Not because I am a former TESDA chief, but I think it's very important, and that's why even in the idea of liberalizing our education sector, I would love to see not only in the higher education, but also in the technical vocational education para talagang maging world class yung ating mga tinitrain na workers. Maraming salamat, Mr. Chairman, for giving me extension. I think some of our colleagues would like to ask questions na, kaya thank you.
Thank you very much for the very pertinent and practical questions, Majority Leader. Now we turn it over to our committee chair, Senator Robin Padilla. Idol.
Maraming salamat po. Ikaw po ang idol ko. Chairman, gusto ko lamang pong ibigay yung oras ko kay Sir Orion Perez, Dumdum.
The senator's time is only 10 minutes, Mr. Dumdum.
I'll be fast.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay. So dun po sa sinabi kanina nung mabuting senadora galing sa Ilocos Norte, yung tungkol sa yung mga locators, mga kumpanya na natanong po niya, sinabi po niya na wala sa kanilang nagsasabi na may isa dun sa mga issues daw nila yung mga restrictions. Ngayon, sasabihin ko po, ang problema po dito ay yung tinatawag nating survivorship bias. Kasi po yung mga natanong po niya ay yung mga nakapasok na sa Pilipinas. Yung mga nakatagal na sa Pilipinas. So never naging issue nila yung restrictions dahil pasok sila. Pero yung dapat tinatanong po natin ay yung mga naandun lamang sa Singapore o sa Hong Kong na tumingin sa Pilipinas pero di na pumasok. Dahil siguro ay nakita nila yung saligang batas natin na napakaraming mga restriction at dun sila nawalan ng gana. So yun po yung kinakailangan natin gawin. Huwag po tayong nagtatanong lamang sa mga sino yung nandito sa Pilipinas na mga kumpanya, kundi sino yung mga maraming kumpanya na gustong-gusto talagang mag-hire ng mga Pilipino. Ako po, dahil doon ako sa Singapore, marami po mga headquarters po doon. At lagi kong nakakausap yung mga matataas na rango. Dahil meron po akong sideline dati, nag-host ako ng mga events, nagsa-stand up comedy ako paminsan sa mga corporate events. Nakakausap ko po yung mga matataas na rango doon. At talagang bilib sila sa mga Pilipino. Sobrang bilib nila sa atin. Pero ang problema, kahit gustong-gusto nilang mag-hire ng Pilipino, nahihirapan silang pumasok sa Pilipinas dahil nga dun sa mga restrictions natin. At paminsan, ang problema ng mga restrictions natin ay hindi mismong actual na issue. Ito yung mga tinatawag nating impression. Parang natatakot sila na dahil dun sa Article 12, Section 10, parang natatakot sila na, okay, pasok kami ngayon, yung industriya, yung sektor namin, pasok ngayon, baka next year magkaroon ng bagong amendment sa foreign investment restricted list at biglang mapasok yung kumpanya namin dun sa listahan yan. At paano na kami? Parang ganun yung
issue ng policy stability is what you're adverting.
Yun po. Your
Honor, Mr. Chairman, if I may just very quickly.
Yes, of course, Majority
No,
Leader.
I'm very interested on what Mr. Dumdum is talking about. What do you have any ballpark figure or something? Kasi tama ho ito magandang mapag-usapan natin yung hindi pa nakakapasok dito, no? Kasi mahirap talagang i-anticipate yan, and I'm sure in your field nakikita nyo po yan, ilan yung mga ganyan yung situation, looking at our country as a country of where they can put in a lot of money and invest and hire and create more jobs in the country. No, meron ba tayong mga pag-aaral po dyan, just to give us...
Well, ako mismo wala akong pag-aaral dun. I would say Dr. Sikat might probably have those. But ang masasabi ko, ito ang masasabi ko, no? Magtanong po kayo doon sa mga kumpanya, mga galing sa Western countries, no? So mga European, Australian, British, Canadian, American companies na pumasok sa Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam. Halos lahat ng mga yan, unang tiningnan ang Pilipinas bilang opsyon. Una nilang nakita ang Pilipinas dahil magagaling po tayo mag-Ingles . Magagaling po ang maraming mga inhinyero natin . Pero doon po sila natatamaan ng mga restrictions natin. At paminsan hindi po actual, as I said, ito yung tinatawag nating nanangangamba sila na baka naman next year masama na yung particular na sector namin. No? So yun yung parang thread, yung tawag dyan, sword of Damocles hanging over companies na pumasok sa Pilipinas pag nakikita nila yung Section 10 ng Article 12. Yun po yung isang problema. Isa pa, sasabihin ko lang din, yung lagi natin syempre paulit-ulit pinag-uusapan yung high cost of electricity and power sa Pilipinas. Pero meron po akong naging talakayan kasama ng isang kaibigan, kaibigan po rin namin ni Senator Robin Padilla, si Dr. Emmanuel Noli, ay sorry, hindi si Noli, yun yung tatay. Si Doy Santos, no? Yung kaibigan po namin, na isang ekonomista, at pinag-usapan niya na yung, kasi nandun po siya sa Australia nakatira. At sabi niya, ang problema po dun sa yung power distribution problems ng Pilipinas ay ang kanyang pinakaugat na issue ay yung 60-40 din ng ating saligang batas, no? Natatakot pumasok ang mga power distribution companies doon sa lugar na yan. So, yun po, kumbaga lagi natin sinasabi, electricity daw, pero saan po yung talagang ugat noon? Bakit hindi ganun kaganda yung ating power generation industry? Ano to? Ito yung tinatawag nating high capitalization requirements po meron dyan eh. Usually, high technology requirements. Maraming mga foreign companies po ang may kaalaman dyan, pero hindi sila makakapasok dahil takot sila sa ating mga restrictions na ganyan. I also wanted to mention, ito pong, yung mga constitutional restrictions, paminsan po, ay nawe-weaponize. Nawe-weaponize laban sa iilang mga kumpanya. I will give the example of FedEx. Yung FedEx po ay isang courier company, nagpapadala ng mga sulat, ng mga packages, di ba, pakete, ganyan. Ang nangyari sa kanila ay may isang local na kumpanya na nagsampal ng kaso at sinabing sila raw ay isang public utility raw. At dahil doon ay sinasabing unconstitutional daw ang pagiging 100% or majority American-owned ng FedEx. At napunta po ito sa Court of Appeals, no? At sinabing ano daw sila, labag daw sila sa ating saligang batas. Muntik na po yang nangyari doon sa angkas. Ang angkas, yung sa mga motor, no? Ang angkas daw ay sinasabi rin ng iilang mga kalaban ng angkas na ano daw sila, public utility raw sila. Pero tapos inano daw, unconstitutional nga daw. Dapat 60-40. Bakit, ano yan, Singaporean yung may-ari, si Angeline Tam. Buti na lang, si Angeline Tam, ang kanyang asawa ay Pilipino na si George Royeca at inayos po nila yung mga papeles nila para maging majority owner si George Royeca. Secondly, sasabihin ko, ang katotohanan tungkol sa angkas ay hindi naman sila public utility. IT company po sila. Gumagawa po sila ng phone mobile app para makapag-connect ang mga gustong sumakay at sa mga driver ng mga motorsiklo. Hindi po sila transport operator, hindi po sila may-ari ng mga motor, hindi po sila employer nung mga nagda-drive ng mga motor. So, mali po yun. IT company po talaga sila. Nagko-connect lang po sila ng ride-hailer at ng mga drivers. Yun lang po. Pero ang ginawa, kinontrahan sila using the constitutional restriction. So ito po yung sinasabi nating problema na laging nawe-weaponize at laging nagiging publicized ito sa international business community. Yung nangyari sa FedEx, pinagtatawanan po tayo dahil sa nangyari dyan. Yung angkas, muntik na pong nangyari yun. So yun po, kaya nga sinasabi ko po, mas maganda po na tanggalin na lang po natin sa ating saligang batas itong mga restrictions na ito. At kung kailangan natin ng mga regulation at mga restrictions, doon na lang po natin ilagay sa statutory legislation. Maraming salamat po.
Mr. President, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman,
Yes, Senator Pia.
could I ask him if it's still within the time that Senator Robin allocated to the resource persons? Can I ask follow-up questions? If it's within the time.
Well, I've been strict with members who tried to
Okay.
ask questions, so I just to let
Okay.
you know, before you arrived, some of our members wanted to ask
I
questions.
was listening to your rules, so no problem. I just
So,
thought,
we apologize for
I
that.
just
I just
thought
want to
that-
be consistent in the application, much as I
problem.
want to
No problem.
indulge you, Your Honor. Yeah. Pasensya na po. Yes, next to ask questions is the Minority Leader, Senator Risa. Deputy Minority Leader.
Salamat, Mr. Chairman. Bago yung mga hinanda kong tanong, I really would like to follow up yung usapin ng prejudicial question, which I believe actually a couple already of our resource persons raised, beginning po with Justice Mendoza. So my staff looked at the records of the deliberations of the Constitutional Commission. At kung pwede, Mr. Chair, I'd like to read one paragraph where it says, Mr. Regalado, I also noticed that both sections 1 and 2 are premised on the anticipation that the Commission, not only the committee, will opt for a unicameral body. In the event that the bicameral legislative body will carry the day, has the committee prepared contingency proposals or resolutions? Sumagot si Mr. Suarez, yes, in that situation, we would propose to include the words, in joint session assembled. And then nag-follow-up question si Mr. Regalado, but still maintaining the same number of votes? Mr. Suarez, the commissioner is right. Mr. Regalado, thank you. So, at tingin ko po, Mr. Chair, relevant po ito, pertinent dun sa prejudicial question na kung anong rules ang dapat i-apply. The word assembled kasi po suggests a physical assemblage as proposed earlier by Justice Mendoza. So, parang ang intent po nga ay may pagkikita pero magbobotohan ng hiwalay dahil nga may same number of votes. Maybe our framers, those physically present, and if Chris Monsod is still online, maybe our framers could shed light on this. At kasi kaya nga po ako nagmungkahi ng suspension kanina para po magkaroon ng clarity yung ating proceeding. So just to add a little more clarity at this point in time, could our framers of the Constitution shed light on this issue, Mr. Chair? Would Justice Mendoza or Chief Justice Davide like to address this first? Justice Mendoza?
Yes, that's what they really decided in the Constitutional Commission. And it was only by reason of oversight that the corresponding phrase was not placed there. But the other provisions of the Constitutions were amended. Oversight lamang. Oversight.
So, by oversight, Justice, ang hindi po nailagay ay yung in joint session assembled. Tama
In
po?
joint session assembled.
Pero yun po sana yung intent ng framers, at least based on the records of the deliberations.
Yes. Yes, because we speak only of separate voting if they're in joint session. Kasi kung if they're not in joint session, no sense in saying voting separately kasi talagang magkahiwalay. But precisely because the intention is to compel the two houses to come together and assemble so that the enacting clause will say, be it enacted by the Senate and the House in joint session assembled by the vote of 3/4, voting separately, hereby propose.
Maraming salamat po. So, malinaw, assembled, pero klarong-klaro at consistent, voting separately.
Yes, because this is just one house. What is required is for the two houses. Sabi ko nga, I don't believe you were here, Senator, when I said it. Kung gusto ninyo makita kung anong ginawa when after the war, right after the war, we had a Congress with two houses. When the problem of parity rights came up, and that required constitutional amendment, the two houses met together at nakalagay doon sa certification of the secretaries that the two houses met together where in Lepanto, Sampalo, where Congress was holding sessions. So that illustrates the application of that provision. Thank you.
Salamat po. Opo, wala pa po ako doon. Pero yung mga magulang ko, buhay na po noon. Would either CJ Davide or Justice Ascuna like to add to this? Or Chris Monsod?
I stick to my original position also, that there are two ways for Congress to propose amendments. One, in joint session, voting separately, or in ordinary legislation with one body proposing a proposal for amendment to the Constitution and approving the same by 3/4 votes. And then that should be submitted to the lower house or to the upper house, as the case may be, voting also by 3/4 vote. And then plebiscite already.
Permission, Senator Risa, I
Yes,
just
of
want to
course, Chair.
acknowledge
might
Senator
just,
Villar's presence.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you,
Mr.
Chair.
Chairman, if I can just say a few more words
Yes,
to
Mr. Chair.
amplify what I said.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Beyond this debate about construing the silence of the Constitution, there is some benefit if the two houses come together. They can exchange views regardless of their status as senators or congressmen. The Constitution contemplates they are not senators or congressmen. They are members of a constituent assembly. Isang body lamang. So, the benefit of exchange is there, which you cannot have if you leave this policy making to Congress by law. Because one house will be acting here, the other house will be acting over in Quezon City. You will not have the benefit of exchange of views.
Salamat po, Justice. And CJ, dun sa second instance na sinabi nyo, the second way that Congress could amend the Constitution, as if through ordinary legislation, and even if as you propose by 3/4 vote, still consistently voting separately, obviously, sa second way na yun.
I agree, Senator. Because you represent two different interests. The national interest is represented by the Senate. The local interest is represented by the House. That's the essence of bicameralism.
Salamat po,
With your
Justice.
permission,
Yes, Mr.
Senator
Chair.
Risa, it's on this point very specific. Justice Mendoza, what if the House and the Senate had a Zoom meeting? Would that fall within the contemplation of the Constitution? Because we had Zoom meetings and Zoom bicameral meetings during the pandemic. So that's not provided in the Constitution, but neither is it prohibited. So I'm wondering, would that fall within your contemplation of a joint session, or you need to be physically present in the same room?
Yes, Mr. Well, probably you can find some reason for not meeting together. But as long as you do not discriminate between Senate and House of Representatives. But if you meet in one place, senators and congressmen, and then in another place, senators and congressmen, I think you can see there that there is an effort at bicameralism, excused only by pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Justice. Thank you, Senator Risa, for the interjection.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're very kind po, Justice, yung that we'll find some reason not to meet together. Right? Hindi na po ako magko-comment doon. Justice Ascuna, would you like to add anything to this question before I ask Chris Monsod?
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, and Madam Senator, I believe that although the records would show that Sensing Suarez said they would, in the event bicameralism was adopted, they would accordingly change what is now Article 14 to reflect voting together but voting separately. The fact is he did not. He did not change it there, leaving an ambiguity to the manner in which Congress will achieve the 3/4 vote. So ultimately, it will have to be the Supreme Court that will decide what is the manner in which this 3/4 vote by Congress will be achieved. So it is good, I believe, that the Senate now is going through the process of adopting a proposed amendment by way of a resolution of the Senate and the House voting separately and meeting separately, and submit that later to the Supreme Court to be decided whether that is a proper manner of proposing amendments to the Constitution. Ultimately, we have to have this resolved by the Supreme Court. I think Justice Suarez, in leaving the ambiguity without changing the wording, wanted it to be determined by the Supreme Court, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, Madam Senator.
Salamat po, Justice Ascuna, which is precisely why, Mr. Chair, I hope that we can clarify this one way or another. Hopefully the simpler and the shorter time duration way. In any case po, to my first question, may mga assurances po that these discussions only concern the economic provisions specified in RPH 6. At nagbanggit din po sina CJ Davide at Justice Mendoza tungkol dito. But a Constituent Assembly throws the whole 1987 Constitution wide open for review or amend and possible distortion even. And no provision is actually safe. Tama po ba yun?
Anybody can answer, Your Honors.
As I mentioned earlier, touching on the economic provisions would in effect also affect the declaration of policies and state principles and policies. The moment that it will change any particular principle or policy, it would be a revision. Because the provision now on the article on national patrimony, for instance, or on the general provisions or on education are only implementative of the declaration of principles and state policies. The moment you change it, you have to automatically change also the fundamental principles of state policies.
At bukod po dun sa, in effect, amending or revising a basic principle or state policy, kahit may assurances o agreements pa, prior to limit the scope of the discussions, wala namang magpipigil sa kahit sinong miyembro ng Kongreso to propose other changes. Halimbawa, legislators could initiate changes in our basic laws on foreign ownership even of land, on term limits, on the frequency of elections, on limitations on the use of governmental power, even the fundamental rights of citizens. Tama po ba ito? CJ, pakibuksan yung mic.
Those matters are to be taken up, really. It is more than an amendment. It, in effect, would be revisions of fundamental principles. For instance, in the matter of the plebiscite on the proposal in the PI regarding a change in the manner of voting, it should be joined, and therefore, in effect, it would eliminate the Senate. It would eliminate the Senate because you have the massive majority of the lower house. So the moment you approve what is in the PI, it will open the floodgates of everything. Eventually, all changes will be done without already the voice of the Senate.
Which is why po, CJ, Mr. Chair, the Senate opposes and continues to oppose the People's Initiative. Pero meron din po akong agam-agam at gusto ko pa rin itanong yung possible scenario, kahit sa pamamagitan nitong RBH 6, as an initial doorway na dadaanan. That couldn't it lead to that scenario in a Constituent Assembly, in Congress jointly assembled, that any representative or even senator could then, once the door has been opened to amendment o lalo na revision ng isang basic principle pa, fundamental policy, na pwedeng kahit sino sa amin, in effect, mag-propose ng amendment or revision to any and all parts of the Constitution.
Very clear under Section 1 of Article 17 that there are two ways of revising the Constitution. Amendment or revision may be done by Congress or by a constitutional convention. The third proposal, however, can be done by the People's Initiative. We are talking here of amendment by Congress itself, and therefore it should be a constitutional assembly acting as a CONAS, no? But considering that the Constitution is not very, very clear about it, mentions only joint, we have the proposal of Father Bernas, one of the commissioners. Now, it could be done in either of the two ways we have taken up much earlier. Either by way of ordinary legislation, with the two bodies voting separately and in a separate session, or in a joint session, voting separately.
Hindi po ba parang nagbubukas kami ng Pandora's box at hindi natin alam anong lalabas dito from the depths of that Pandora's box once the process is initiated? Mr. Chair, Justice Ascuna.
Mr. Chair, it cannot go outside of the resolution because of the requirement that a proposed bill or resolution shall have only one subject. If they will add to the resolution of both houses, number 6, for instance, they will amend it to include a political subject. That will be in violation of the rule that a proposal shall have only one subject. So if they want to bring in extraneous matters, it should be another resolution. And the Senate will not agree to it, so it won't be a joint resolution. So this joint resolution is limited only to economic provisions. In fact, you can put that in the title, a resolution to amend and economic provisions and for no other purpose, something like that. In other words, limited to the rule of one resolution, one subject matter.
Thank you, Justice Ascuna. I'm glad to have that on record as we continue to deliberate this resolution of both houses. Dun naman po sa Senate hearings on the Fraudulent People's Initiative, it was clear as day how many members, unfortunately, of the House were willing and able to use the influence and the resources also of government to advance certain interests. Nung mga, even in those early days, tila buong makinarya ng gobyerno ang nagamit para lokohin yung mga Pilipino para sa makasariling layunin. At sa ganitong klima, and again, I'm proceeding on the premise that of a Pandora's box, not something that can 100% be limited, with all due respect, by that one bill or one resolution, one subject rule. So ano po yung assurance natin na hindi lang ililipat yung ganyang klaseng makinarya para isulong whatever comes out of RBH 6? Would anyone want to venture? Justice Mendoza, Mr. Chair.
I think that attempt by People's Initiative to amend the Constitution when acting as a constituent assembly is the clearest admission on the part of those proposing it that unless you change the Constitution, the requirement should really be joint session, voting separately. Kaya nga ho, gusto nilang baguhin doon sa People's Initiative itong procedure na ito. That is the clearest proof of what I'm saying is the meaning of Constituent Assembly, meaning joint session, voting separately. And the best illustration of that, as I said, application is when Congress met after the war. It was a bicameral Congress that we had. And they were passing a very important proposed amendment, parity, economic provisions. And what they did, they met together according to this certification of the secretaries. They met together in the session hall of the House of Representatives. And where is that? In Sampaloc, Lepanto, Sampaloc. That's where Congress was meeting at that time. That to me is the clearest example. And that is to be found in the opinion of Justice Briones in the case of Mabanag versus Lopez Bito. 78 Philippines, page 1, page 77 in particular.
Salamat po, Justice Mendoza. I'd just like to go into at least my first question, Mr. Chair, on the legitimacy of the need to amend the economic provisions, na yun yung heart and soul nitong RBH number 6. Nung Disyembre, nung nakaraang taon lamang, so just 2 months ago, binibida ni Presidente yung mga nakalap niyang investment pledges sa napakarami niyang biyaheng international sa China, sa Switzerland, Japan, Estados Unidos, UK, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, at Saudi Arabia. Ayon sa kanila, nasa 2.484 trillion pesos ang nakalap na pangakong foreign investments. At sa lahat nito, as in sa bawat isa nito, wala namang kondisyon na kailangang baguhin natin ang kaluluwa ng bayan, ang saligang batas. So on the heels of that success, di umano, bakit bigla ngayon ay sasabihin kailangan natin yung charter change? Maybe, Mr. Chair, if I could ask Mr. Africa,
Yes.
if he could comment on this.
Sunny, go ahead, please.
Mr. President, I was talking to the resource person because he's my neighbor.
Did not hear the question.
I
Maybe
will apologize for
It's
him
all right, Madam
because I was
Chair.
taking his time and he may not have
Senator
heard
Risa.
the question.
Yes, hold your horses, Mr. Dumdum. You'll have your chance. No?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Africa, tinatanong, it's all right, good gentlewoman. Yung tanong ko lamang po, bakit biglang ngayon sasabihin kailangan yung charter change in relation to FDI? Binibida ni Presidente pagkatapos ng maraming state visits nila last year, first 1.5 years, just last December, sinasabi nila more than 2 trillion pesos ang pledges na FDI without the shadow of kailangan may charter change dyan sa bawat isang iyon, Mr. Chair.
Actually, feeling ko po, I apologize po for the that might be a rhetorical question kasi, well, with that, media and advertising aren't, and education, advertising education aren't really very big areas for foreign investment. So, kung magkaka-argument na, oh no, there would have been more, sana, I doubt actually there would have been much more. But I think precisely I do agree, if those pledges were there and we assume that they're real, they didn't need the charter change. Much more, they didn't need this specific charter change right now or changing the other provisions. So I think it affirms your point po. Sorry. Yeah.
Salamat po, Mr. Africa. And then maybe lastly, Mr. Chair, if I may have one more question.
Well, just to let you know, it's your call if you want to hear from him. Mr. Dumdum is raising his hand.
I need to ask a follow-up question to Mr. Africa, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. We'll hold your horses, Mr. Dumdum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In like manner, Mr. Africa, kanina, foreign pledges without any quid pro quo on charter change. Kahit sa binuong Philippine Development Plan, referred to by Christian Monsod earlier, 2023 to 2028, na pinamunuan ng NEDA at si Presidente ang chair nun. So nilatag yung kabuuang plano para sa ekonomiya ng Pilipinas, para paramihin ang trabaho, puksain ang kahirapan, pataasin ang kalidad ng buhay nating mga Pilipino. Nagawa na po ba natin? Is it going well, yung implementasyon ng buong PDP na yan? At saka, do you know, sa 450 pages ng PDP na yan, meron po bang kahit isang pagbanggit na kailangang baguhin yung konstitusyon in order to implement the plan?
I don't recall po seeing anything dun sa PDP. Pero siguro pinakamahalagang punto po dyan, is the PDP doing well? Sa amin, mahalaga for the record, despite yung pinagmalaking mabilis na economic growth last year, actually between November 2022 and November 2023, nabawasan ng 70,000 jobs. And the biggest reason na sinasabing lumiit yung unemployment rate to 3.9%, it's because maraming discouraged workers, maraming hindi naghahanap trabaho, walang trabaho pero hindi binibilang as unemployed. Pero siguro, ang key point po, I think even our economic managers, in their heart of hearts, absent any political influence, they know there is so much more that needs to be done and that can't be done and isn't being done right now na hindi kailangan ng charter change. I mean, nadinig ko po yung isang statement about ano pwede gawin para tulungan yung mamamayan na walang charter change. Actually, ayun yun. And I think, I do agree, ganun kasimple lang yun. Kung may gusto gawin, ang daming pwede gawin ngayon. Kung papasok pa sa usapin ng charter change, makaka-distract lang siya, makakagulo lang po siya.
Salamat, Mr. Africa. Mr. Chair, may I move on to another question? I still have time. Salamat po. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 minutes, so maybe just 2 questions for today. Salamat po. Kasi nga yung isang focus ng RBH 6, public utility. So, talking about, for example, the telecommunication sector. So nervous system siya ng modernong ekonomiya. Kailan lang binuksan ng Kongreso sa pamamagitan ng amyenda sa Public Service Act. Doon po, sinasabi ng NEDA na yung problema ay yung duopoly. Yung manong duopoly ng Globe at PLDT Smart at kahinaan ng NTC bilang regulator. So, hindi magamit ng ibang kumpanya ang towers nitong dalawang higante. Mahal mag-text at tumawag sa mga subscribers ng bagong kumpanya sa Globe at PLDT. Hindi makuha ng NTC yung frequencies na hindi naman ginagamit nitong dalawa para magamit sana ng mga bagong kumpanya. At saka kahit maliliit na cable companies na pwede sanang gawing mura ang internet, ay kailangan pang kumuha ng prangkisa. Well, sa ating Kongreso. So, sinasabi ng NEDA, kahit noong pa man, bago pa man ipasa ang amyenda sa Public Service Act, wala sa border, wala sa, at NEDA na to wala sa constitutional restrictions ang problema. So nandito po sa loob ang problema, ibig sabihin sa bawat industriya. At wala pa tayong ginagawa sa Senado kahit matagal nang nakasalang ang OADT o Open Access in Data Transmission Bill. So yung una sa last two questions ko sa ngayong hapon, Mr. Chair, sa palagay po ba natin ay papasok ang kapital, Pilipino man o dayuhan, kung nakikita nilang may dalawang higanteng nakahambalang at walang ginagawa ang Kongreso upang payagan ng iba na ayusin ang serbisyo sa mas murang halaga? So, to Mr. Africa still, Mr. Chair.
Favorite resource person, Sani. So, please listen to the question.
Sige po. I'm sorry po, I can't speculate if a big telecom provider will come here. But I think historically, a lot of transnational corporations have come in, even if may corruption, as long as they have the connections to be the ones getting the inside track. So there's a general statement lang po, but kung dun sa specific na question yan, I don't know. But also to be clear, even the big telecommunication firms, they do have substantial foreign capital already. So they know how the business operates. So it's not like, again, it's not like bulag sila na mag-table read pa sila kung kumusta yung mga bagay-bagay. They know how things operate, and I think if that is going to be an advantage for them, they will use that. And last point po, in a lot of ways, a lot of the anti-corruption campaigning the last years has been led by foreign transnational corporations sa mga jurisdictions na wala silang kilala. Sa mga jurisdiction na may kilala sila, gagamitin nila yung same connections nila, just the same as any domestic provider.
Salamat, Mr. Africa. At huling tanong ko para ngayong hapon, Mr. Chair. Alam po ba natin na sa Thailand, lubhang mas mura ang serbisyo at mas mabilis at malawak ang internet? Pero sila po ay may batas din na nagsasabing bawal maging majority owners ang dayuhan. Gayunpaman, yung 4 sa top 5 na telecoms companies nila ay nakapagpasok ng kapital. Like you were saying earlier, that many of these big transnationals, kahit sa telecom sector, may sarili ng foreign capital sa resources nila. Nakapagpasok ng kapital mula sa mga kumpanya sa Singapore, China, at saka Norway. So, alam po ba natin ito? And could you please enlighten us further about this?
I think po that's a very good point kasi sa aming pagkwenta, Thailand has a 49% cap on foreign ownership, Malaysia has 30%, 49% for certain services, Vietnam is capped at 49%, Indonesia is also capped at 49% for the infrastructure, for the facilities. So I think that is a good case in point. Yung demonization ng publicly owned corporations and also demonization of local corporations, pinakita na maraming mga kumpanya dito sa ating rehiyon, hindi actually balakid doon. As long as pinapatakbo ng tama. At para sa amin, kung bubuksan lamang yan, yung ilang beses na banggit na lack of control over a strategic industry, actually mas delikado yun. Kung di natin alam ang ginagawa natin, mas mahirap actually ibigay sa dayuhan yon. Kasi kung di na nga natin na monitor yung lokal, what more, wala tayong kakayanan to monitor yung di hamak, mas makapangyarihan, mas malakas, mas nakakalaman dayuhan. So delikado po yan in terms of yung national security interest natin.
Salamat, Mr. Chair. And when I come back in the second round, I'll take off from that point, precisely yung reaction ko sa ideya ni Presidente ngayon magpasok ng third party, posibleng foreign. Hindi nga natin mapabehave ng maayos pa yung NGCP. Ano pa kaya kung may third party at kung foreign pa yon. So, Maraming salamat. And lastly, I think what you pointed out, Mr. Africa, is it's not one single or most important factor, FDIs. It's a whole package of policies and practices para mapakinabangan talaga ng bansa, ng public good, lalo na dito sa mga public utilities natin at saka critical industries. Salamat at
Thank you
maraming
very
salamat,
much.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minority Leader Ontiveros. I'll give you 2 minutes, Mr. Dumdum. Please be brief.
Okay. I just wanted to interject that, so first of all, the question on the other countries that have restrictions, the question is, are those restrictions in their constitutions? The answer is no. Only the Philippines has such economic anti-foreign direct investment restrictions in the Constitution. Yung po yung pinagkaiba. Sa atin nasa Constitution, sa kanila nasa legislation. Ito pa, yung isa pa about the pledges. Magkano po yun? Mga trillion, something trillion.
Something trillion is what I heard.
Diba?
Dollars,
Okay.
dollars, no? Dollars.
Ang tanong, bakit ba ginagawa natin itong constitutional reform na ito? Unang-una, tanong ko, kasi ang sagot ko ay tanong. Ilan dun sa mga investment pledges na yan ay naging totoo na? Ilan ba yung mga planta na natuloy na itatag? Ilan na ba yung mga pabrika? Ilan na ba yung mga kumpanya o yung mga operations, yung mga opisina na nagbukas dahil dun sa mga pledges? Mukhang pledges pa lang yata eh. At doon po natin makikita dahil mga pledges pa lamang sila. Kaya natin ginagawa itong pagbabago na ito dahil madalas kapag nag-iimbita po tayo ng mga investors, hindi po natin nasasabi sa kanila may mga problema tayo na ganyan, yung mga restrictions na yan. So eventually, dun sila nag-aalma. Ay, may restrictions pala kayo. Kaya kailangan natin ayusin. Yun po yun. Maraming salamat po.
Sir Dumdum. Next is Senator Win, and after him, Senator Bato and Senator Aimee, Senator Pia, in that order.
Thank you.
Senator Win.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to direct my questions to our esteemed justices. I was listening intently, and there seems to be 2 schools of thought. One is to convene physically as a constituent assembly. And then number 2 is we can go through it just like any other ordinary legislation, meaning we pass the resolution here, then we transmit it to the House, they pass it, they either adopt it or they pass their own version. And then if there are no disagreeing provisions, we can just continue on with the plebiscite. I just want to ask our experts, seems to be 2 different approaches. What will be the best way to move forward with these 2 different approaches? And I would like to direct to any of our justices if they have any opinion on this or any answer to this question.
Yes, go ahead. Anybody would care to answer? Parang pagod na yata ang ating mga resource person, Your Honor. Yeah.
For
Anybody
me,
can,
Mr.
Justice
Chair,
Ascuna.
the best is what you're doing now through a joint resolution of both houses, passed separately in the manner of ordinary legislation, but with clear signals that you're acting as a constituent assembly. And then adopted by the required number of votes. And also when you vote, you have to vote by what you call is nominal voting, so that the 3/4 vote is very clear. You cannot do it by consensus or viva voce. It has to be by nominal voting, recording individual votes. If you can have that, 3/4 of the Senate voting to approve resolution of both houses number 6 and pass it to the House, and the House also after deliberation adopts the same resolution by 3/4 vote, nominal voting of the members of the House, then it's ripe for referral to the COMELEC for upon certification by the secretaries and the Senate President Speaker to the COMELEC, and the COMELEC will be mandated to hold the plebiscite within the required, I think, 60 days from the adoption not later than 90 days, within 60 to 90 days, to hold the plebiscite. That's the best way and the fastest for me, Mr. Chair.
So in your opinion, there's no need to physically convene as a single assembly. We can go through this just like we are doing now and just like any other ordinary law.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
The only difference is we have to vote, we have to obtain 3/4 in terms of votes, and at the same time ratify it through a plebiscite.
Yes, Mr. Chair. There's no need for both houses to meet physically. This is the interpretation of Father Bernas. You can do it like the way you're passing an ordinary law. That means you can do it without meeting together, provided, as I said, it's very clear that you're acting not to make a law, but to propose amendments to the Constitution. But also, again, the quorum and the required number of votes must be observed.
Want to, with your permission, Senator, we just to acknowledge the presence of our chairperson of the Public Services and Economic Affairs Committee, Senator Grace Poe. Afternoon.
Your Honor, just on that particular issue.
Yes, Chief Justice, please.
The best really is the one you recommended in your Senate, both houses resolution number 1. You are proposing for a joint session, and therefore it must be voting separately, but 3/4 for each side, for each house. That is in your resolution.
Thank you, but that calls for a physical convening of both houses in one area, in one location. So do we need to satisfy that physical assembly, Chief Justice, in your opinion?
One, the Senate President, and there are no rules yet, no, in both the Senate and in the House, in calling for a joint session. So probably the Senate President and the Speaker will agree to call the two houses together in a joint session. The other way is probably for the Senate now to file a resolution requesting for the approval by the lower house of a joint session.
Thank you for that. Another question, again, to our esteemed legal luminaries, and this was partly opened up earlier in the discussion, that we are now treating the resolution as an ordinary resolution. And this is the Committee on Constitutional Amendments. After the hearing, the committee will now submit a committee report and sponsored by the chairman or both chairmen to plenary. And I am of the, but what I gathered from the hearing is then on, the Senate will now convene into a constituent assembly. You know, therefore, earlier our Senate President mentioned that there will be a separate time for that constituent assembly. My question is, can the constituent assembly be limited by the committee report submitted to plenary? Because the committee report will contain very specific provisions on the economy. But when you convene the constituent assembly, can it be limited by those topics alone? Because it's now a separate body from the lawmaking body. So I just want to pick on the wisdom of our esteemed justices and resource persons.
That is the reason why I suggested two ways. Either that the Senate President and the Speaker shall decide to call, no? And then the two bodies, the lower house and the upper house, may decide to a joint session, precisely for the purpose of presenting these proposed amendments. So the other way is, right now, for instance, you can either proceed to continue, and then at the end of the day, when the matter is submitted to the mother committee may recommend to call for a joint session precisely to consider this. And that is exactly the reason in my preliminary statement, I asked the question whether whatever is the recommendation of the subcommittee should still be submitted to the mother committee, which is the Committee on Constitutional Amendments and Revisions of Codes. That is exactly the proposal you made in Senate, both houses, resolution number 1.
And in the organization of the Constituent Assembly, just here in the Senate, it can be limited by that committee report because it will consider that particular committee report, meaning it will not consider the other political proposals or other proposals other than that committee report.
Yes, it will be limited exactly to what is being proposed. But yet, the whole trouble is, during the hearing thereon, somebody may move to amend, to add.
There has to be discipline among the members.
The best example is, in your proposal, you included media. In the discussion of resolution number Senate joint, or rather the both houses resolution number 6, number 1 may be taken into account, and therefore the 4 may be taken into consideration by the mother committee.
And I understand also in the previous Congress, I think 18th Congress, the House also submitted, although this is in the previous Congress, 3 additional amendments to its economic provisions, which is land ownership, natural resources, and I think it's the ownership of economic enterprises. Can that be included once they also convene into a Constituent Assembly? My point of the matter, Chief Justice, how do we limit the Constituent Assembly to only certain provisions that we want to amend so that it will not be unwieldy when it convenes?
Let's consider when you are doing this as a regular legislation. What you approve here would be an ordinary law. Going down to the lower house, I rather disagree with Justice Mendoza on this regard, that it is already a constituent body. It is an ordinary legislation going to the lower house. The lower house, acting on their own, will consider possible amendments. It could add other areas of amendments. Like, for instance, as I mentioned earlier, the proposal in the lower house, both houses resolution number 2 of Congressman Salceda.
We'd just like to, with your permission, Senator Win, just to acknowledge the presence of Senator Alan P. Trayano, the former Speaker of the House and our former Majority Leader. Good afternoon, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for that, Chief Justice Davide. Thank you for the answers. And my last question revolves around the specific industries or sectors that we're trying to liberalize. In the proposal here in the Senate, there are 2 resolutions. One is to liberalize the education sector, advertising, mass media, and then public utilities. May I ask our esteemed legal luminaries, what was the reason in the past? What was the discussion and the reason in the past to limit these 4 sectors? I might have my own idea on why, but during those times in 1986 and even earlier, what was this discussion to limit those so that we can enrich the records? And also, I want to appreciate the discussions earlier that might lead to unintended consequences also when we do this at this present day. So any of our esteemed resource persons can respond to that question.
We have to consider the spirit behind all the proposals here in the Constitution. It's the spirit of nationalism and patriotism, or the Filipino first policy. We thought all along that we could manage to improve our economy, our social conditions, through these provisions on the fundamental principles and policies and the implementing articles in the Constitution. You have provided, for instance, the article on social justice, so broad enough, on labor, on many things. If only these are fully implemented, you could see how progressive the Philippines would be. For instance, on foreign investments, our dear Senator Ontiveros had already mentioned of what had come in, even just through the visit of the President abroad. So foreign investors are coming in, not because of any provision in the Constitution which would be an obstacle, but because we have become attractive. In other words, ease in conducting business, no corruption, then predictable government policies, and so on. These are the keys to progress, not the provision of the Constitution as an obstacle.
I think Mr. Dumdum wants to...
Yes, again, please keep it brief. Sir.
Yeah. So back then, during the drafting of the 1987 Constitution back in 1986, I think the prevailing ideology at the time among many Filipinos was that being protectionist was the way to go. But unfortunately, I think that's where we kind of went wrong, because at that point in time, that was when Vietnam had decided that their way of doing things, the communist, Marxist-Leninist way, was not working, and they realized that, oops, I think we need to open up to foreign direct investors, hence their adoption of the Noy Morcoso reforms. And everyone else was also doing the same. Singapore had already become very liberalized, and everyone else in the region was doing so. We were the only country that decided to stick towards economic nationalism, and unfortunately, we have been left behind. We are continuously getting left behind because of that.
Thank you, Sir Dumdum. Proceeding from the constitutional questions of Senator Win, before I recognize Senator Bato, what is the value, Your Honors, of the U.S. experience in exercising their constitutional amendments or enacting constitutional amendments, since Justice Mendoza quoted the seminal case of Marbury versus Madison earlier? May I ask, would their constitutional experience have any persuasive effect, or would their jurisprudence have any effect on our interpretation of laws and constitutions, Your Honors?
Mr. Chair, the U.S. Constitution has been amended several times, I think more than 20 times. In fact, the Bill of
27,
Rights...
I believe, Your Honor. 27.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Bill of Rights was not in the original Constitution. They're amendments. That's why they're called First Amendment, Second Amendment. What I want to point out is that their process of amending their Constitution is through adoption by separate states. And the legislature of separate states passes a resolution adopting the proposed amendment according to the requirement of the respective constitution. So there is no meeting together of all the more than 50 states legislature so that they can hear each other. They meet separately. So there's nothing wrong with the Senate and the House meeting separately. In the U.S., the individual states don't meet with each other. They adopt the amendment by themselves. After a certain number of states have acceded to the amendment, it is effective. So that's what I know of their procedure.
And if, correct me if I'm wrong, Your Honor, but I think the Senate and the House do not also sit together in a joint assembly. Tama ho ba? Meaning the Senate passes the amendment separately, the House passes the amendment separately, and then it goes to the state legislatures, as you mentioned. Tama ho ba, Your Honor?
I'm not sure on the federal level, Mr. Chair. I think they meet together. But what I mean is the individual states, all 50 states don't meet together.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just wanted to add there, what the good justice is talking about is the process of ratification, which is different from ours. Ours.
No, but what I'm asking, since it was my question, Your Honor, is the process of approving the amendment.
Yes.
Not
So
the
I just wanted to point out that
Yeah.
what he was describing about the individual 50 the 50 states is actually the process of ratification.
That's correct.
Which
That's
comes
correct.
after
That's
the
correct.
Constituent Assembly
That's
process
correct. Thank
has
you.
been done.
Thank you.
That's all.
Mr. Chairman,
Uh,
one line on your question.
Can we ask the justices to answer the question before we go to you, Senator Allen? Yeah. Any other? If not, I'll go to anyone else want to weigh in on the import of U.S. practice on our constitutional interpretation, Your Honors? If there's none, Senator Allen, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of information, because the U.S. Constitution was a reaction to royalty, diba? To the absolute power of kings and queens in Europe. So it was really made that the Congress was more powerful than the president, the presidency. So if you look at the U.S. Constitution, mas powerful kasi yung legislature. So may protection against absolute power because in the Philippines, it's usually the executive branch, whether it's the mayor, governor, or president who wants the change. It's not always absolute, but just to put that into the discussion, Mr. Chairman.
That's a good point. Thank you, Senator Allen. Senator Bato, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no question, Mr. Chair. Ang sa akin lang ay isang taus-pusong pagpasalamat sa ating mga resource person, sa kanilang mga insights, sa kanilang mga binigay sa atin na informasyon, na ito'y napakalaking justification sa United Stand na ginawa ng 24 senador, 24 independent republics, nagkaisa na i-oppose itong lumalaganap na People's Initiative, Mr. Chair, because yung kanilang punto palagi sa voting separately. So tayo naman, ang ating opposition doon sa lumalaganap na PI is that we don't want to vote jointly, separately. So maraming salamat po sa inyo, sir, sa inyong mga insights. Maraming salamat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Tama po, Senator Bato. Klarong-klaro na po yun dahil sa sinabi ng ating mga magagaling na resource persons. Thank you. I join Senator Bato's manifestation there. Next is Senator Pia Cayetano. Senator Pia, perhaps you had some questions earlier. You're free. I just want to mention also, Senator Pia is the author of the recently enacted, well, about 2-3 years ago, the CREATE law. And there, a lot of what was mentioned, the things that we need to do, meaning to incentivize technology transfer, scientific development, not just the jobs created and the amount of investment, but also the future growth. Meron tayong mga provisions doon thanks to, under the stewardship of Senator Pia, former Ways and Means Chair. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to also greet our esteemed resource persons, my professor, Vivi Mendoza, if you remember me, sir. Of course, Chief Justice Davide, we worked very closely when you were our emissary to the United Nations. And of course, Secretary Teves, who I recently have been seeing on the golf course, but then I stopped, so goodbye to my golf career. Anyway, to everyone else, good afternoon, Justice Scoan as well, and Dr. Sikat, and everybody else. Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, a few questions. As you said, I'm coming from my experience as the chair of the Committee on Ways and Means, and one of our resource persons, I was, by the way, listening, thanks to technology, I was listening to YouTube, so I heard the opening statements of our colleagues and the statements of our resource persons, so I may not have been physically present, but some of my questions come from the statements that were made that I caught on YouTube. One of the resource persons mentioned the flip-flopping of our rules or the way we conduct business and the way we encourage the foreign business community. And that is exactly what we tackled during the hearings in the Committee on Ways and Means. And so when we talk about flip-flopping positions, as we speak, and this is no critique or anything on the ongoing hearings now, but in fact, we are reviewing again the CREATE law. And one of the revisions being, one of the proposals there is to go back to the incentives that that was given to some investors that have been there for 30 years or more. And this has been thoroughly discussed. We appreciate that the investments have been made, but it's also time for us to gain a little bit from the taxes that would have been gained. So if we're going to go back to that, then that is our main problem, if I may. As I'm not the resource person, but I'm sharing my experience having chaired this committee and going back and forth, and many of our colleagues here were also present during that Congress. So that to me is the flip-flopping of business policies that the foreigners have to deal with. The other thing that I'd like to point out is one of the examples given by my seatmate here, Mr. Africa of Ibon, is the example of the jeepney modernization. It happens to be one of my favorite topics along with Senator Grace Poe, because I am a proponent of electric vehicles, EV for short, but I am not a proponent of destroying this jeepney industry, which is ingrained in our culture, and changing them with imported vehicles when we could very well be revitalizing this jeepney industry and then making it EV. It's a no-brainer. I'm sure DOST can easily do that. In fact, I've had discussions with the Department of Science and Technology. Why don't we do that? And there is no prohibition for foreigners to participate in that, but it is a lack of political will to save this industry. It is lack of political will to coordinate between DOST, Department of Transportation, the barangays and the municipalities and the cities that have invested their lives in building a community around this jeepney industry. It takes time. It's easier to import. That is our problem. It's just easier to import. We didn't make it hard for them. They can come in, but we're destroying this industry. So that's the second point I'd like to make, Mr. President. The other one is just a quick observation. I share the observation of Mr. Dumdum that he mentioned Vietnam, but other countries, Thailand is one, China is another. They are harping on the need to improve their English so that they can capture the English-speaking market. But you don't need to change the Constitution for that. That's been my advocacy for decades. I speak on behalf of our EDCOM chairman members. It's part of the agenda. Let's not lose our competitive advantage by giving up on us being a dual language or even multi-language speaking people. Many of the Filipinos can speak 3 languages, English, Filipino, and whatever province they come from. And we're giving that up because of various reasons. Don't have enough time to discuss that. But you don't need to change the Constitution to focus on our primary, one of our primary assets being multilingual and English being one of them. Just a quick observation. I think one of the resource persons said, and I had asked my staff, are you ready? Yeah, I just want to put on record. Okay. So according to the World Economic Forum, and this is already in the Senate, this is already embedded in our archives because we took this up in the Committee on Ways and Means in the debates on CREATE. Most problematic factors in doing business. Number 1, inefficient government bureaucracy. You don't have to change the Constitution for that. Inadequate supply of infrastructure. Don't have to change the Constitution for that. 3, corruption. Don't have to change the Constitution for that. Tax regulations. We can handle that here. Tax rates. We can handle that. When I say here, Congress can handle that. Policy instability. I'll point to the administration. Not this administration, any administration. Access to financing, policy decision. Government instability and coups, all this is creating that possibility. Restrictive labor regulations, policy decision, maybe Congress. And poor work ethic in national labor force. None of this requires constitutional change. I quote, not in exact words, no, but as I said, I was listening. Sabi ni Justice Davide, our problems are not due to the restrictive economic provisions. I humbly concur, and I in my second round would like to get into more details, but I think it would be nice if our justices can bear with us and join us when we have other resource persons from the business side, no? Because we'd really like to get a nice exchange, Mr. Chairman, if you will allow. No, what I'd like is to hear the not now, but like I said, in a succeeding hearing, an exchange of ideas, or where our justices who know what the constitutions allow and do not allow can hear and exchange ideas with the business community on what they feel they need, so that either it comes from the constitutional experts themselves telling them, but you don't need to change the Constitution to do that, or you do need to change the Constitution to do that. This is just my opinion. It's not my intention to put words in the mouth of our esteemed resource person. The other thing that I took note of is Justice Mendoza's statement, the Constitution is the alternative to a revolution. And I felt that was such an emotional statement. We're sitting here today. We are already late for our Senate session. On the floor is...
That might be my cue to tell us that...
for me to end
no. The SP extended us to 4 o'clock, Your Honor.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
but
he's extending us to 4 o'clock. Yeah.
Exactly,
So.
but I mean, we are eating into our time
Yes.
to work on bills.
Yes. But
no?
it just shows that the Senate is really prioritizing this issue. Go ahead, ma'am.
Exactly.
Sorry for interruption.
No. Totally okay. And on a personal note, I was recently elected Blue Ribbon Chairman, and I had a choice to be working on this all morning or to listen to this debate. So these are the things we give up to have this debate. These are the things we give up so that we don't have a revolution. Anyway, I think I will rest on that high note because that was an amazing statement from Justice Mendoza. I have a few more comments, a few more observations, but I think I've made my point clear, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Pia. Next is Senator Grace Poe, if she has any questions. If not, Senator Alan, I'm sure has some.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But at the proper time, I would like to discuss for the next hearing the Public Service Act, which I believe addresses a lot of the concerns supposedly being raised on the economy. I feel that one of the roadblocks also is the legal impediments that it supposedly faces in the Supreme Court. So I'd like to know from our legal advisors and luminaries present what their view is on the Public Service Act, because actually it is not quite an amendment of the Constitution, but rather a carved out and a definition of what a public utility and a public service is. And this was drafted with the help of our brilliant expert here in the Senate, Senator Frank Drilon. So that will take a whole discussion. So I will give way to our colleague here, Senator Cayetano. Thank you.
Very much. We will call a hearing specifically on the public service and public utility, and we welcome your inputs as the principal author of the Public Service Act amendments. Senator Alan, please, sir.
Magandang hapon, Mr. Chairman, and again to our esteemed guest. We are very, very honored to have all of you, and parang extended po talagang service nyo sa bansa. Every time you think that you've retired or that you've given all, you're called back. So we thank you for that. Sirs, I think we can really debate on facts. Dapat nga walang debate sa facts, di ba? Kasi facts siya. Pero in a world of false news, alternative facts, nagdi-disagree din tayo sa facts. Especially if it's statistics, then hindi siya facts, no? We definitely have to debate on opinion. And it's always good to hear each other's opinion. But I think dapat walang debate sa principle. Diba? Kasi hindi mo mababasag or mababali yung principle. You cannot really say, magtatanim ako ng mangga, and then you expect santol yung bunga. Diba? Kasi kung ano itanim mo, yun ang yung... So let me look at it as a different perspective. As a Christian, I believe the Holy Spirit inspired the Bible, and you cannot amend the Bible. So I tell people, if you don't want to believe the Bible, I respect you. If you believe other holy books, I respect you. But don't try to amend the Bible, because that, to me, is what God wrote. No one is saying don't amend the Constitution. Because no one said it's not a perfect document. But what is the underlying principle behind the Constitution, and why did the framers of the Constitution make it difficult to amend the Constitution? And sir, feel free to correct me after this statement. No? Correct me or to elaborate. No? Because the underlying principle all throughout history, it started with Adam and Eve, and even before that, it started with Lucifer, who rebelled against God, and then Adam and Eve, who did not follow God. Nimrod was a brilliant leader, and he wanted to erect the Tower of Babel and to reach heaven. No? And the principle was simple. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if you're gonna ask me my personal stand, meron pong kapareho nung ating ma-distinguished guest tonight, meron din pong iba. For example po, one thing we're not talking about, the elephant in the room, is actually political reforms. I know we're limited here to economic, but the reality is people are concerned regarding political reforms. Ako, being married to a mayor, I see the problem with a 3-year term. You get into office June, ubus na pondo mo, you just finish out the year, the next year is your year to plan. The year after, everyone's saying it's the election year na, the year after year, ano na, diba? So I would rather have a 4-year term or a 5-year term, 3-year term limit, or a 4-year term na walang term limit. I don't know the former mayors here, like Senator Win, kung anong tingin nila. But the problem is, we can't discuss it because everyone is discussing it from the point of view of what's good for them, rather for the country. No? So even if many of our congressmen, mayors, governors are sincere, hindi na sila tatakbo, magre-retire na sila. But people will say, but you're thinking about your husband, you're thinking about your wife, you're thinking about your children, di ba? So, Mr. Chairman, the only way I think that we can actually amend the Constitution in a way that the preamble describes us as binding together one thing. Maybe I can end with that. No, I just want to read the preamble, just to honor not only Chief Justice Davide, but everyone who worked on the Constitution. But my point is this po, no? If we can find a way to amend the Constitution, but it is effective 10 years from now, I don't think anyone will accuse any one of us na we're doing this because of power, etc. Pero pagka next month na yung plebiscite, 2025 na yung plebiscite, I mean, oh, come on. Everyone's looking kung sinong malakas na next presidential, and if hindi ka presidential pero cabinet ka or speaker or SP, and you can be prime minister but you cannot be president. I mean, it's normal. You name the country, people, they say, because the principle is power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's why the Constitution was made, to temper this power in the 3 branches and to make sure that not one powerful group can manipulate our legal system. No? So, but let me conclude just, Mr. Chairman. I really, want to honor everyone who worked on the preamble. We, the sovereign Filipino people, imploring the aid of Almighty God, in order to build a just and humane society and establish a government that shall embody our ideals and aspirations, promote the common good, conserve and develop our patrimony, and secure to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of independence and democracy under the rule of law and a regime of truth, justice, freedom, love, equality, and peace, do ordain and promulgate this Constitution. I hope throughout this debate, Mr. President, this will guide us kasi opposite ng truth, justice, freedom, love, equality, and peace ang nangyayari ngayon. But I hope, Mr. Chief Justice and all our distinguished guests, you could elaborate nga on why the Constitution was made very protective, that you can't just change it on a whim. No? I know that's part of the human spirit we don't want to talk about, but it's there. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for this time.
Thank you very much for the biblical wisdom in addition to the legal wisdom, Senator Alan. Yeah, any other, maybe Senator Risa wants to ask a few questions. I can we have 2 to 3 minutes maybe for a second round? And then I think, if it's all right with our distinguished resource persons, we thank you profusely for sharing with us your time, Your Honors.
Salamat, Mr. Chair. I'll not refuse that kind of an offer. I do have 2 to 3 more questions sa economic pa rin, if I could return to Mr. Africa. Mr. Africa.
Yes. If he's listening.
Sorry, sir. Kung makapagtanong, it's okay. It's okay po. If I could ask maybe 2 or 3 more questions about the economy in relation po dito sa RBH number 6.
2 minutes.
So, sa power generation sector naman, within the whole realm of public utilities, public services. So, brownout pa ng brownout, parang shades of the early 1990s. At sa huli, 3 araw nag-blackout hanggang sa Panay at sa Guimaras Islands. So, alam po ba natin, and of course by this I mean, if you could please elaborate on this for us, na higit 2 dekada ng bukas ang power generation sector, as Chris Monsod also mentioned earlier, para sa 100% na pagmamayari ng banyaga. Pero sa 2 dekadang iyon, ay hindi naman naengganyo na maglagak ng kapital dito yung mga dayuhan para suplayan ng kulang at pupundat-pundat nating kuryente. So, bakit po kaya?
Sa amin po, balik kami dun sa earlier na point, mahirap i-manage ang industriya na wala kang alam. So kung uurungan ng gobyerno yung pagkakaroon ng direct interest sa industriya ng kuryente, tapos aasa ka lang sasabihin sa'yo ng kumpanya, parang weird, di ba? Parang sabihin mo dun sa kumpanya to be self-incriminating. So sa amin, it is a starting point. That's also why I think bakit sa Malaysia, sa Indonesia, maraming may restriction dun sa foreign investment, but also may direct stake yung governments in utilities because it's easier to manage things you know about eh. So sa amin, we don't know what happens sa Visayas. Siyempre, nakakatuwa yung pakinggan yung balita. But bottom line, it's hard to manage but you don't know anything about. And sa amin, that whole trend towards privatization, isang nawala yun eh, yung kakayanan natin bilang gobyerno na responsibly manage ang isang industriya. So much worse nga yan. Hindi maganda na hindi mo kontrol ang lokal na negosyante. I think even worse, hindi mo kontrol ang dayuhan negosyante na may ibang dimension ng strategic interest sa bansa.
So I guess, Mr. Chair, Mr. Africa, ibig sabihin din, magandang may paghuhunos dili din ang gobyerno in terms of privatization, especially in sectors na may mas malaking public interest at stake. And umalam. No? We can't forever give the excuse na hindi yan alam ng gobyerno, mas alam lagi ng private sector. Maganda kung mag-upscale din ng capacities ang gobyerno precisely to take care of and to regulate areas na siya yung pangunahing magbabantay ng public good for the citizens. And balance yung, syempre, profit orientation naman ng, na nasa kalikasan ng private sector. Mr. Chair, yung next question ko, kung pwedeng matanong si Christian Monsod if he's still online, since, salamat,
He's
Mr.
still
Chair.
online,
Yes.
Teresa.
So, Sir Chris, to continue and to ask you to, I'm circling back to the point you first made about the power generation sector in your opening statement.
Sorry,
Yes,
I received
Mr. Chair.
just the information now. Senator Teresa is logged out already.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if Mr. Africa, you could bear with me just to complete this maybe last 2 questions about the power generation sector. So, alam po ba natin na sa Vietnam naman, tulad dito sa Pilipinas, nagbukas sa mga dayuhan para sila'y pumasok sa generation sector. Pero generation, hindi sa transmission, hindi sa distribution. Pero bakit po kaya, kahit halos sinlaki lang tayo ng Vietnam, population-wise, bakit yung installed capacity nila ngayon ay lumaki ng halos 3 beses, 2.86 times, halos triple, na ang laki kumpara sa installed power generation capacity ng Pilipinas. So what was the decisive factor there, or factors?
Yung infrastructure, magastos talaga siya eh. So napakataas ng startup doon. Kaya natural monopoly sila. I think Vietnam is a good case in point kasi much as maraming naiinis dun sa pakikialam ng ng Vietnamese government kasi socialista, komunista, whatever. Hindi pa masasabing terorista. Ang bottom line, there were and are state-owned enterprises. At kung state-owned enterprise yung papasok, una, mas mababa yung cost of capital. Ikalawa, mas madali yung mga licensing, all the regulatory issues, parang that's ironed over eh. So I think magandang point yan. At siguro kailangan din i-correct, hindi totoo na bukas yung Vietnam. Dun sa aming PowerPoint, isabit na namin yung report, yung restrictions across the Vietnamese economy, from telecommunications to power to transport, very strongly restricted pa rin siya, apart from having state-owned enterprise, even sa manufacturing. So, hindi totoo na free market economy in Vietnam. Hindi rin totoo na pumasok yung foreign investment dahil free market economy siya. Pumasok ang foreign investment kasi may mapagkakitaan siya dun sa Vietnam. Under, not necessarily free market economy, under whatever economic regime na meron nila. Kumikita sila eh. And I think that's the bottom line for any foreign investor.
And like Mr. Chair, Mr. Africa, you were showing how in different countries sa home region natin, may iba't ibang percentages set or cap set on foreign investments. Dito, sa particular na halimbawa ng Vietnam, pinapakita nyo rin, yun na nga, the package of policies and business practices either allowed or supported and regulated by the state na the companies can turn a profit pero merong ding standard set by the government para sa mamamayan nila na mas strictly na ma-observe. And then, kagaya po ng telecoms na pinag-usapan natin kanina, may nakahambalang sa pagpasok ng kapital sa power generation at hindi ang border restriction o ang constitutional provisions na naman ito. And as you were talking about, pinapatunayan din ito ng Vietnam na kahit as you were also describing, hawak pa rin ng gobyerno at lokal na kapital ang transmission at ang distribution ng kuryente. At kahit nga as you were enumerating for a region earlier, may maximum na 49% limit ang foreign capital dito sa transmission at distribution, ay maglalagay pa rin ng dayuhan ng kapital sa power generation. Because given the whole environment created by government and what exists of civil society in Vietnam at yung private sector participation, domestic or foreign, ay kumikita pa rin yung mga kumpanya. So, just to bring it home, ano po kaya yung pumipigil sa dayuhang kapital na magpundar ng mas maraming kapital sa power generation sector natin nitong nakaraang 2 dekada, Mr. Chair?
Siguro correction muna, as far as we know, yung in Vietnam, yung distribution and transmission ay sarado to foreign investment. As far as we know, I mean, we can double check that. Pero, I'm sorry po, I can't speak for foreign investors here, pero I think it makes sense eh, yung sinasabing predictability, even predictability of corruption, it's a big thing eh. So whether it's predictability and the ease of doing business. I mean, there are different ways to package it. Mas mura infrastructure, less corruption na binabayad for mga permits, less cumbersome. I think that actually might be what should be addressed eh. At gusto ko namin i-stress talaga, may mali sa pag-iisip na yung flexibility ang hinahanap ng foreign investors. Kasi because precisely in so many utilities in most of the region, at least in the major economies, marami pang foreign restrictions, but they have more investment than us. Malaysia thrice, I think, than us. Thailand has double us. Despite the restrictions in the utilities, it means hindi yung restriction yung nakabara sa pagpasok. So that's so simple-minded. I think it's a very reductionist argument to absurdity talaga. And I think it's so easy to repeat something over and over again and believe in it. Pero I think the facts show otherwise talaga.
Salamat, Mr. Chair, Mr. Africa. So, sabi nyo nga...
May I interject?
Mr. Chair, my last question is still for Mr. Africa.
This is the time of Senator Risa, so will you allow Mr. Dumdum to interject? It's your call. It's your discretion.
Mr. Chair, you gave me time for 2 to 3 questions.
Yeah, we'll stop at 4 o'clock because that's the authority given to us by the
and my last
Senate
question
President.
is really for Mr. Africa.
Go ahead,
on the economy, if I may. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And salamat, Mr. Africa, for pointing out yung it's not the restrictions, it's not the so-called flexibility, but really more of predictability. Restrictions they can live with, but also enough space to still conduct their business there and, as you said, remain sustainable if not profitable. So yung huli ko lang po for today dito sa power generation sector. So ngayon naman po sa pamamagitan ng legal opinion ng DOJ ay madaming dayuhang kapital na ang nagplano at pumila para punan ang power supply gap na matagal nang sanhi ng napakamahal na kuryente dito sa atin. So, yung huling tanong ko for today, Mr. Chair, Mr. Africa, pero nababalitaan po ba ninyo na maaari daw madiskaril ito? Ayon sa BDO, halimbawa, at ayon din sa mga bagong renewable energy players dito sa atin, baka pala dobleng laking kapital ang kailangang ilaga kada megawatt ng renewable energy kaysa sa inaasahan nila. Alam po ba natin ang dahilan nito? RE was supposed to be the game changer in the energy sector. So bakit ngayon there's a sudden unpredictability about that positive next step that we'll be able to take?
Heard about that po, but I'll reserve comment na lang po muna. Pwede naman may habol, but we want to study it further. Pero nabalitaan na nga po namin yan. So, not now sana po.
Salamat, Mr. Africa. Salamat, Mr. Chair. Abangan ko na lang or konsultahin ko diretso si Mr. Africa once they've completed their study on that issue.
All right. On that note, I think the SecGen has already come up to me, the Sergeant at Arms rather, reminding me of the Senate President's reminder. So you can submit whatever you wish. We'll take cognizance of it, Mr.
It'll be very fast.
Yeah. No, it's okay. We're adjourning we're suspending the hearing already. Please submit na lang. Thank you to our justices, Chief Justice Davide, Justice Mendoza, Justice Ascuna, Dr. Sikat, Sani Africa, Mr. Dumdum, Secretary Teves, Attorney Desturas. Thank you very much for your patience and for sharing your wisdom. So we'll suspend this with the permission of our members. Salamat po. Thank you, Chairman Robin, Idol.